a very cool but very unknown species that surrounds us everywhere. So, lichen is a very small organism that basically covers most of our lands and often goes unnoticed and is often mistaken for moss and other things. The field of lichenology is still very, very, very small, and there's lots of left to be discovered. And once you begin to recognize lichen, it really makes every walk that much more beautiful. So I'll do a little kind of like crash course type of presentation, and then move forward into some question and answer and maybe some discussion on your experiences with this lovely species. So, but before I get started, I would like to acknowledge that the sacred land in which we operate is situated upon the traditional territories of the Wendat, the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, and most recently, the Mississaugas of the Credit. This territory is covered by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement between the Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee allied nations to peacefully share and care for the lands around the Great Lakes. Black Creek Community Farm recognizes the many nations of Indigenous people who presently live on this land, those who have spent time here, and ancestors who have hunted and gathered on this land known as Turtle Island. And I realized I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Adjoa, and I'm the Farm Education Coordinator at Black Creek Community Farm. And yeah, and I'm also joined here with other Adjoa, who is also working at the farm. All right, so everything also that I talk about today will just give you a quick glimpse into the vast alien world of lichen. So I encourage you to see what really stands out to you and then explore that topic further, maybe possibly even discovering your own type of lichen. You can go on to the next slide now. But before we get started, we need to understand the foundations of what creates lichen. Lichen is a perfect example of symbiosis. Symbiosis is a partnership between two different organisms living in close association. So in this case, it's fungus and alga. The dominant partner in this relationship is fungus, which gives the lichen the majority of its characteristics from its shape to its fruiting bodies. And fungi, as you know with mushrooms, are a really diverse group of organisms that are in their own kingdom. Separate from plants, separate from humans, they rely on other organisms for nutrition and are known widely for their role in the decomposition of organic matter. They're also necessary for the survival of the ecosystem around them, such as partnering with plants and trees for nutrients and survival. You can go on to the next slide. So algae, which is a partner of fungi in the symbiotic relationship, are in another kingdom called Proista, which is separate from plants and fungi again. So there are many, many, many types of algae, including green, brown, red, and gold, and they can usually survive in saltwater and freshwater on their own and in any environment, which is one part of a lichen relationship. So I'm sure if you've looked at Lake Ontario, you can definitely see there's lots of algae that like to hang out on the rocks around Lake Ontario. Yeah, and you can go on to the next slide. So now these two really amazing, strong partners come together and they create lichen. So there's probably a bunch of other, components to this partnership that we actually don't really know about yet because lichen is still a very new field of study. But there are approximately 3,600 species of lichen in North America alone and 20,000 species worldwide, but that's just the ones we know about. Every day there's new ones being discovered. They live in a vast, vast diversity of habitats and climates, including the Saharan Desert, to the Alaskan alpine tundra, and even in tropical rainforests in Puerto Rico. And not many people know what lichen are, and honestly, they look quite bizarre, kind of alien-like, and no two are alike. They cover about 6 to 8% of the Earth's surface and are considered to be among the oldest living things and the first living things to grow on fresh rock exposed after events such as landslides, and the long lifespan and the very slow regular growth rate of these organisms can be used to date historical events. And this study is actually called lichenometry, which is really awesome. Lichens do not really have like a waxy cuticle like plants have on their leaves, nor do they have any vascular tissue that moves nutrients and water around them. Like a plant does. So everything in a lichen's environment is absorbed into the lichen structure. And this structure is composed of layers of fungus and algae in that, again, symbiotic relationship. So what are lichens not? So let's say you're taking a walk on the forest floor and you see some lichen maybe on trees and rocks or other debris, and it may be assumed that it is a type of moss, but it's not. So both moss and lichens are both non-vascular plants, meaning that they lack stem, roots, and leaves. And mosses are believed to be the ancestors of plants that we see today. So any plants like trees, flowers, or ferns. But lichens, on the other hand, are just not similar at all. So, but what lichens and mosses have in common are their size and their habitats. That's why you often see them kind of living together in the same like rock or in the same tree, because they both need to retain water to grow. And so next time you decide to take a walk through the forest and you see a bunch of mossy stuff hanging from trees or sitting on a rock, just try to see if you can decide if it's a lichen or a moss. It makes forest walks a lot more interesting and a lot more cool because there's just so much living around us. And lichens are also really important for many reasons. They're honestly so beautiful to look at, and they add to the magic of many places around the world, such as the Pacific Northwest. You can actually go to the next slide now, sorry. And the next one. Oh, sorry, go back. My bad. All right. So lichens are important for many reasons. They're honestly so stunning to look at, and they add to the magic of so many places around the world, such as the Pacific Northwest, which has a staple. As you can see on the left, it's called witch's hair lichen, and it hangs from the branches of the old Douglas fir trees and Sitka spruces, and the Rocky Mountains and many other places. And on the right, you can at the top, you can kind of see a red looking type of lichen that's usually common in desert type places. And on the bottom, you can see lichen that is in the Arctic tundra. So it looks more green, more like muted to kind of match the theme of the environment. So lichens also provide a mode of survival in really harsh environments where algae cannot normally survive. Lichens enable algae to live all over the world in many different climates, and they also provide a means to convert carbon dioxide in the atmosphere through photosynthesis into oxygen, which we all need to survive. Lichens directly benefit humans by their ability to absorb everything in the atmosphere, especially pollutants. So lichens can provide us with really valuable information about the environment around us. So heavy metals, carbon, sulfur, or any other really like strong pollutants in the atmosphere are actually absorbed into the lichen, and then scientists extract these toxins to determine the levels that are present in our atmosphere. So you can actually, and maybe your city has a database online to actually show all the lichen data and that has been gathered for the air around us and the air quality. And you can go on to the next slide. So there are three main types of lichen that I'll go through today. The first one is called foliose lichen. So foliose lichens have very two easily distinguishable sides, meaning that there's a top side and there's a bottom side. So they can either be very flat and leafy like lettuce, or convoluted, full of ridges and bumps. As you can see in the photos here, they have a quite diverse look to them. And you can go to the next slide. Fructose lichens can be kind of pendant and hair-like, upright and shrubby, or upright and cup-like. And many fructose lichens have really round branches that have a central core, and others are hollow in the middle. And they also can have flat branches that can tangle up with each other, looking kind of like hair. So they're very mystical. And you can go on to the next one. So fructose lichens are just like how they sound, like they look very crusty, and they form a crust over a surface like a boulder, soil, a car, or even roof shingles. They can come in many, many bright, vibrant colors like yellow, orange, and red, as well as grays and greens. And these lichens are usually pressed against the substrate, which means their environment. So they're usually very tightly attached to something instead of like, floating all around like the fructose ones can be. And so lichens as well can also come in many, many different colors. So the color of the lichen is usually determined by the photosynthetic component. So pigments such as yellow, mucin acid actually gives lichens a variety of colors, including reds, oranges, yellows, browns, especially in exposed dry habitats. And in the absence of special pigments, lichens are usually bright green to olive gray when wet, and gray or grayish green to brown when dry. So really the color of the lichen changes depending on whether the lichen is wet or dry. So if you decide to maybe, take a walk and take some samples from the woods, you can add water to it and the color of the lichen may just completely change, which I think is really awesome to see. And on the left here, we have the Bay of Fires, which is, I got the opportunity to visit there. It's out in Tasmania, and all the rocks are covered with this red lichen that's been there for many, 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 many years. And it's quite beautiful because at sunset, it looks as if the bay is on fire because the sun just adds this really beautiful red glow, like on top of the already red glow on the rocks. So it's quite like a magical experience. You can go on to the next slide. So lichens also have very, very specific requirements for their habitats. Even though they can occur on a variety of substrates, each substrate must have individual components in the right amounts that growing lichen needs. This includes water, air, nutrients, light, and substrates. So very similar to what a soil needs. So water is really important to lichen because lichen cannot conserve water during drought periods, but they can absorb everything through their cortex, including water and water vapor. So many lichen are found in really foggy areas like the coastal areas, but not really further inland, simply because there's just not enough water in the air to support them. So on the east and west coast, there's very, very beautiful and like very strong population of lichen as well. And here in Ontario, we have tons and tons of lichen anywhere near the Great Lakes, anywhere near our many rivers and our streams and our creeks. It's just a perfect environment for lichen because there's just so much water vapor in the air. And so when lichens are wet, they turn on and they start photosynthesizing and growing. But when they're dry, they turn off and become, kind of sleepy. They become brittle and they go dormant. And this process is called polycatry. And other organisms such as mosses operate in a very similar way. So if the lichen you see looks really pale and dry and brittle, then it's dormant. So if you wait for the next rainfall and you go back and see, you'll see it photosynthesize and turn into something that can look completely different than what you saw, a couple of days before. As well, lichen need really clean and fresh air to survive because they really just absorb everything through their environment. So from beneficial nutrients to harmful toxins, lichens just, they absorb it all. They also absorb the water in the air, which is why so many are found in fog belts along oceans and big lakes. And not many lichens can survive in cities, unfortunately. And the ones that do survive in cities have a very, very high tolerance to the pollutants in the air, like the heavy metals and the acid rain. And the main nutrients in lichen are nitrogen, carbon, and oxygen. Nitrogen is especially important and is necessary for the production of proteins and organic acids, and not just for the lichens, but for life on planet as a whole, because a lot of animals eat lichens like squirrels and moose and things like that as well. And similar to plants, lichen have difficulty retrieving nitrogen for their use. So they use something called cyanobacteria, which is a bacteria that lives in a variety of moist soils. So what this does, cyanobacteria and the soil form another symbiotic relationship. And they use this bacteria to fix the nitrogen so that it can be used. So lichen will basically fix the nitrogen in the air and make sure that it is good. And next, lichens really need light to provide energy to make their own food. Different lichens need different amounts of light. That's why you're able to find lichens on exposed rock and desert soils, on leafy trees, or in a shadow on the mossy ground below. The color of lichen is also dependent on the amount of light it receives. Species that adapt to brighter, hotter environments are generally more pigmented and dark in color, and the ones that are in, beautiful, like sunny environments are very bright and very distinct color. You can actually go back a slide as well. You can go back a slide. Yeah, thanks. So as you can see, so you go forward one. Yeah, so as you can see in like the picture at the bottom, it's very red and very distinct. So that means that it's probably in a very warm kind of desert-like environment. So every lichen lives on top of something else. The surface that they live on is called a substrate. And anything really that stays still long enough for a lichen to attach and grow is a suitable substrate. But the most common ones are trees, rocks, and soils. So maybe if a human stays still in the forest for like a year, they might get a bunch of lichen on them. So if you actually have lichens growing on your rocks and trees and ground around you, it's actually a very, very good thing, because that means that the air that you're breathing is actually really healthy and really clean. And soil is another important substrate for lichen. It provides moisture, nutrients, and space to grow and shelter as well. And a really unique and cool habitat that lichens also colonize is dune systems. So if they're really stable for long enough, the shifting sands can actually be held down by these soil crusts. So you can see a soil crust in the top left. That's a picture of the soil crust, which really allows the communities of lichen to establish themselves over top and create dunes. And lichens can actually, over a process, take quite a bit of time to create new fertile soil from lifeless stone. They are important in contributing nitrogen to soils in some deserts through being eaten along with their rock and substrate by snails. And once the snails eat them, they poop, and then they put nitrogen into the soils. So as an example of the cycle of life, turning a rock into soil. Lichens can also help bind and stabilize soil in sand dunes and in deserts and semi-arid areas. Lichens are part of the extensive living biological soil crust, which is really, really essential for maintaining soil structure. And they have a long, long, long fossil record in soils dating back to about 2.2 billion years. So it really shows how ancient these organisms are. So lichens are pioneer species. They're among the first living things to grow on bare rock or areas denuded by life or by a disaster. They're often the first to settle in places lacking soil, constituting the sole vegetation in some really extreme environments, such as really high altitudes and the frozen of Arctic regions. Because now I remember seeing all these animals living in these like crazy environments and wondering how can they possibly be surviving? This lichen provides nutrients for them, which is very, very interesting. And the interaction between lichens and air pollution has actually been used as a means of monitoring air quality since about 1859. So it's been around for quite a while. And most cities, again, have websites or articles discussing the air quality in the area based on the lichen samples collected. So I encourage everyone to explore that because it's quite an interesting way of seeing how the air we're breathing is doing. And you can go on to the next slide. So humans basically use lichen for a bunch of things that we don't really think about. So lichens actually used a lot in toothpaste, deodorants, salves, and a lot of other products. And as food, lichens are eaten by many, many different cultures across the world, but I don't recommend eating them when foraging them here until you've done all the research and there's certain chemicals that need to be removed from the lichen before you can consume it because those chemicals are toxic to humans. So old man's beard, as you can see, was used to start fires. So maybe if you're in the woods, you see some old man's beard, you can use it to start your fire. Iceland moss is an important source of food for humans in Northern Europe and was cooked as a bread, porridge, pudding, soup, or salad. Biura frumanti was an important food in parts of North America where it's usually cooked in a pit. And reindeer lichen was consumed by the indigenous peoples of North America and Siberia after it was removed from the rumen of caribou or reindeer that have been killed. And umbilica escuna is used in a variety of Korean and Japanese foods. It's quite a delicacy. And yeah, I recommend everyone trying out some lichen one day. And you can go on to the next slide. So this is a really cool kind of study I stumbled upon, but lichens have actually been shown to degrade polyester resins, as can be seen in really big archaeological sites. This is the one in the Roman city of Baelo Claudia in Spain. And so this site has actually been preserved from weathering in comparison to the other non-lichen covered spots, because the lichen has kind of had this protective shield over these pillars there. So that's why the site still looks very, very like present, like very real, very, modern compared to like some other sites where there's a lot of degradation, but the lichen actually protects the stone from completely disappearing. And as well, they absorb several environmental pollutants such as lead and copper on top of that. And you can go on to the next slide. So as well, lichen can actually be used for a natural dye. So in the Highlands of Scotland, traditional dyes were made from lichen. So you have the orange lichen here. As you can see, it's a very beautiful, rich color. And you have the gray lichen on the other side, which can also be used, for a gray color as well. So there are reports dating back to almost, 2,000 years old of lichens being used to make purple and red dyes. And they're actually used by the ancient Egyptians as well during burial rituals. So lichens have a very kind of subtle presence in all the history on the earth. And you can go on to the next slide. So on this slide, I just have a little video, which I think by this amazing photographer. He really has a really strong passion for lichens. And I think everyone should really see the real beauty of lichens, because pictures don't do it justice. You really need to see the details that they have. So yeah, you can go ahead and play.
So most people think a lichen is a moss. That's kind of where it ends. To the untrained eye, it could just look like another branch or another leaf or another twig, or even a piece of bird poop or a piece of gum on a rock. They don't understand them. If you don't know that it's alive and it's an organism, you might gloss over that. These things are often very ephemeral, and so you need a way to capture that, the beauty, the colors, the shapes, before these things wither away naturally. Start looking at lichens and you look at this finer scale, you realize the actual microtopography of that landscape is actually huge. Lichens are a mini ecosystem. It's not one organism. My name's Tim Wheeler. I am a lab manager at the University of Montana. But kind of my passion is fungi, specifically lichens. By trade, I'm not a photographer. I consider myself a naturalist. I took a forestry class with the professor, and he pointed out these lichens growing on the trees, and he was like, hey, we really don't know anything about these things. And that kind of piqued my interest. So I just kind of casually started collecting them. The 10th or 12th lichen that I collected, I didn't recognize it. I thought it was cool and new, so I sent it off, and it turned out to be a new species to science. That doesn't happen if you study birds, and I kind of got hooked. Historically, a lichen was considered part algae and part fungi. As we've dug into these things deeper, we're finding that it's more complex than just these two partners. There's other fungi in there, there's other algae, cyanobacteria, other bacteria, all working together, basically in this little mini ecosystem. The fungus produces the structure, right? So think of it as like a little greenhouse, which inside that they're growing algae. The algae are photosynthesizing, the fungus provides water and other nutrients, minerals and stuff like that. The diversity of lichens is huge. Foliose, which are your big leafy lichens, they have an upper and lower surface. You have these fruticose lichens, and these are your 3D or branching lichens. And then you have the crust lichens, which are kind of crusty, right? If you can just draw a crazy shape in your head, in your mind, that probably exists in the lichen world. That's what I like about lichens. You have these things that are flat and boring. You have these things that are incredibly long-lived and incredibly branching. Any complex 3D structure you can probably imagine, we could probably find an example mimicking that. It is exciting when you find that perfect specimen. It has all the characters. It's, pristine condition. You want to be able to someone to look at it from a human perspective, but you also want to be able to show those smaller details all in one shot, right? And so my photography skills grew out of the need to illustrate these specimens, these species. The collection started because you needed to come back to kind of verify your IDs. Back here I have, I think, just over 16,000 specimens. So that's 17 years of collecting. I have kind of one wall that I've been trying to contain it to. I don't think I'm ever going to stop collecting lichens, so my numbers are only going to go up. It's kind of like a checklist, kind of like birders have a life list. You feel good that you've captured that organism. So once I pull it out, unwrap it, we're taking high magnification photos. At such high magnifications that we're dealing with, you might only have one little plane that can be in focus. So in order to overcome that shallow depth of field, my camera is attached to a rail, and every 125 microns, it'll take a picture. That gets sent to the computer, this program, he'll come focus, and they stack them, and they take every little sharp bit from every layer and make it into one continuous sharp image from front to back. And the result is one picture. When I first started stacking pictures, I would everything was in sharp, nothing was out of focus. And because I thought that's what was important. But as I got into it more, I kind of shifted more towards the art. A little bit of depth, a little bit out of focus in the background actually makes the rest of that stuff pop a little more. Sometimes I'll wet it if it needs to be rehydrated. You might have this boring little gray lichen on a rock, but when it gets wet, it could kind of unfold and kind of almost flower and turn into this brilliant blue-green thing. It's always exciting to see them come alive. You can almost take the specimen out of its habitat, kind of raise it up to this glorified color, shape, everything can be perfect. I think a lot of scientists, they have a little point and shoot camera. For me, that just didn't cut it. I needed to make them, the center of attention. I don't think the general public knows the importance of them. They're notoriously sensitive to air pollution, to changing temperatures. And so if you have a changing climate, what's the first thing that's going to respond are these fungi. You can kind of get a trend of how your climate is changing because these lichens respond so quickly. So I hope my photography aids in the just general awareness of lichens and how cool these things and how important they are.
Hey there, this is Luke Groskin, video producer for Science Friday. Thanks for watching.
Yeah, it's a little video about lichen photography, which I think is very beautiful because these things are they're everywhere, but they're so easily missed. So I think when you can focus on them and really blow them up and show the detail and just the complexity of them is quite interesting. And a lot of artists like to just look at lichen and just sketch them out because the shapes are really unique. Every single one of them is different. And yeah, it's a really good experiment. And even when you take it from the woods, maybe start your own collection as well, because each of them are very different. And honestly, most of them probably aren't really discovered. So maybe if you discover something else, like this photographer actually discovered this random lichen he found in the woods, he sent it off to university, and that lichen actually hadn't been discovered before. So he created its own type of lichen. So I really think everybody can do that. And yeah, so I'll open up to some questions now, or if anyone has any lichen stories they want to share. Yeah. Bioluminescent lichen. I don't think so. Yeah, I'm not too sure actually. There's actually just not a lot of research done on lichen. So even in preparation of this presentation, I was like, whoa, there's actually not a lot. It's a very, very new field. So I'm absolutely sure there's bioluminescent lichen because there's bioluminescent mushrooms. So there has to be. So maybe one day I'll find it. Sharif?
I just want to say, I've seen a bunch of lichen on walks and stuff, but it's so interesting to see it as a indicator of kind of air health. And I'll definitely think about it a lot more while I'm walking out there.
Yeah, especially if you have it around you, you know that the air around you is pretty good. So it's like a very easy indicator to see. Is anyone into lichen before this workshop that they want to share anything about? D, A, and J? D, A, T, and J? Did I miss a letter?
Yeah, I had a question. I
Yeah.
think you might have said it, but I might have missed it. Like, how do you tell the difference between moss and lichen? Or is there an easy way to do that?
So it's kind of tricky because they look very similar, but lichen, if you look at like the 3 types that I shared, they have like, they can either be very like crusty looking, so they'll feel kind of like crunchy if you touch it. And there's ones that look very stringy like hair. And there's ones that are very like flatly attached to the surface of like a rock or a tree. So that's usually a good way to distinguish them, because mosses are usually like, they're very soft, they're very carpety, they're very, you know, mossy. So yeah, that's a good way to distinguish them. So if they look quite odd, not like moss, they're probably lichen.
Cool, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm pretty sure there's one for Toronto. I'll just find it and drop a link in the chat for that. And propagating lichen from a forest. So you don't really like have to propagate them, as long as you take them from, let's say they're on a tree, and you can just kind of like take a piece of the bark. And then you can just keep adding water drops to like change the color and stuff. And then just like you did in the video, just keep them in like a dark, cool place, and then they'll stay alive. So just as long as you mimic the natural environment, they'll be fine. And let me just find the link to Toronto lichen air quality.
I first learned about lichen while reading Robin Wall Kimmerer's book, Braiding Sweetgrass. And yeah, it was a really nice way to learn about them. And I didn't actually realize how much was around me, like in the trees by my mom's place and all the different types I had been seeing. And I really love how they exist because of harsh environments. It's kind of it feels romantic that it's 2 things that have to come together because things are hard and they need to survive. So I definitely think lichens are cool.
Yeah, so I'll send an email with the links after as well to some lichen resources. But yeah, I really hope that this field really blows up over the years, because there's just so much.
D, T, and J have their hand up.
Yeah.
I just wanted to know, how did you find out about lichen?
Well, I was just taking a walk and I was like, what is this? I keep seeing these really like alien looking things, and I keep picking them off the ground, but I just don't know what it is. It doesn't feel like a moss. So I was like, let me just get up Google and see what it is. And then lo and behold, I was exposed to this beautiful world of lichen. So yeah, I hope you go out to the forest and find some lichen too.
Thank you.
Thanks.
No worries. Any other questions or comments? Oh, thank you, Catherine. Awesome. Yeah. Yeah, I think especially it really makes really like even small wooded areas like that much more interesting, because you really see how much is going on just if you just look a little bit closer at things around you. And really like lichens also adapting to the climate as well. As the climate's changing, a lot of the lichens adapting and still cleaning our air and still working with us. So I think it's Very awesome, the adaptation power of lichen. Yeah, and also take lots of pictures. Like I think they're really awesome things to photograph, even with just like a regular phone. And yeah, I really hope everyone gets a little bit more into lichen, and also email me with all your pictures because I love to see them. And yeah, the weather's really beautiful as well. And I don't collect any lichen specimens. I mostly observe, but I think I'm going to start to collect some specimens. I was just, living with my mom before. She's like, "What do you bring into the house? All the bugs." So she's not a big fan of them. She thinks they look really weird, but now I will. Yeah, D, A, N, T, and J.
Do you have any tips on where I could find some lichens?
Yeah, so anytime you go into the woods, just look at any rock, any tree, anything really that's on the ground, any pieces of wood, then you'll be able to find lichen. So they're everywhere. And just go after it's rained or go out on a foggy day, and you'll see them a lot better because you see them being really colorful. So they're not too hard to find. No worries. Yeah, they're one of those things that everyone has seen, but no one really knows what it is. Thank you, Danny and Alex. Yeah, awesome questions. Yeah, I'll be here to answer any questions or just to have a little discussion about lichen. So further reading and learning, yeah, so I would recommend just same thing with mushrooms, just getting a field guide for, so there's field guides for the lichen of North America, and that's a really good place to start. So it shows you all the different types of lichen that have been discovered. And yeah, like Adwa said, braiding sweetgrass is a nice little like historical one about lichen as well. But yeah, again, it's still very new. So there's actually not quite a lot of books published about specifically about lichen, but field guides are a good place to start. I'll just write the names of those. Yeah, I found like there's tons of lichen in the city actually. Sometimes even on like the roadside trees, you can see some lichen on the actual tree bark. Like High Park, near the Don Valley. I'm trying to think, any really green space that has quite a bit of trees and maybe a stream running through it will have lichen around it. So yeah, just next time you go, just look a little closer at things and then you'll find lichen. But yeah, the key thing is that it'll be like after a good rain or it'll be after like on a foggy day. Because all the moisture in the air will come and like really gray, but they'll still be there. Yeah, cooking mushrooms are yummy. Gonna have some oyster mushrooms for dinner today. Especially another book. It's good. There's a lot of art books on lichen too, just like photography books on lichen, which are really beautiful. You just want something to admire the pictures. Yeah, mosses and lichen. Yeah, mosses and lichen is another, like, it's kind of a short little, sweet little book about mosses and lichen and their relationship. Yeah, I'll be here to answer any questions or any discussion, but yeah, you'll feel free to go when you're ready. Thank you. Thank you. Have a good evening. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Thanks for coming, everybody. Really appreciate it. Thank you for coming. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, next week we'll be talking slime molds. Thank you. Thank you for coming.
Have a good night. Thank you.
Oh, you can probably stop recording now too.